Hey everyone, we're back with Dan Pink, live across the world, again from Vienna in Hofburg Palace. Have you been, by the way, in a more extravagant studio at all?
No, but I'm loving your palace, Justin. It's lovely.
Yeah,
I like what
yes.
you've done with it. Yes.
Yeah, I worked really hard building this by myself.
Yeah.
I was kind of stunned the first time I came in here and I was like, I don't think I've ever been in a studio this fancy, like gold leaf and everything.
No, it's an extraordinary building.
So I want to start with a throwback if I can.
Lay it on me.
Whole New Mind.
Yes.
That's the first time I heard about the Dan Pink. And what are the Asia, automation, abundance, 3 A's.
Okay.
Does AI fit into automation, or are we looking at maybe the creation?
Fourth eye? Fourth A?
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, let me offer some context to the millions of your viewers who don't know what you're talking about
Yes,
here, which is the book A Whole New Mind, which made an argument 15 years ago-ish that those forces are moving us from a world that prizes metaphorically left brain skills, logical, linear, sequential spreadsheet skills, to a world that privileges more metaphorically right brain skills, artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking. And so, certain kinds of jobs are going to Asia where they can be done cheaper just as well. Certain kinds of jobs are being automated. And then also abundance is creating new needs. And so what we're seeing here is that I might have been wrong. So here's the thing. I think AI is.
Well, in what way? We can't just hang on.
I think it's right, but I think in some ways it's understated.
Okay.
Because what I said is that it's going to be a long time before we can automate certain kinds of creative tasks. It's going to be a long time. So I'll give you an example, Justin.
Please.
So I said something about facial expressions. I said at the time in that book, this is 15 years ago.
This is a while ago.
Computers, software can barely detect, identify a face, let alone the emotion conveyed in that facial expression. And now, I mean, we have scanners that when you get on an airplane, just look into something and it identifies your face immediately.
Right.
And it can. So I think that AI is a big deal, and it might. I think where it's right is that we want to have the jobs we'll be doing are jobs where we use our human skills to augment machine intelligence rather than compete with machine intelligence. And I'm not sure we know what the contours of that actually look like right now.
So maybe a fourth A then.
Could be. It could be. Or it could be that the and I said of the A's, automation was the most important. This is almost like A+.
Yeah. So like as AI begins to take over, like people are worried about the taking over jobs thing. If you want to comment on that, that's fine. I'm not particularly worried about it based on all the interviews I've done about experts in the AI field. I think it's going to add more jobs than it takes. But as AI begins to replace jobs like coding, accounting, those are the immediate ones. Are we still asking companies to hire people that are artists? Is that still advantageous?
Probably. I think we're asking. I mean, I think what does it mean to be an artist today? I think that's a really interesting question. So in the old days, if you go into some of the museums here, what it meant to be an artist was that you took a paintbrush and you took paint and you laid it onto a canvas manually. Now, when you look at what artists are doing, they're using technology. I mean, I guess paint is a technology, but they're using technology in all kinds of ways to tell stories, to convey ideas, to demonstrate emotions. And so I think you want that artistic sensibility. What can artists do? Artists can give the world something it didn't know it was missing. Artists have the great skill of composition. Not only visual artists, but musical artists, theatrical artists can compose. So you want to have inventiveness, composition. You're just going to be using a super powerful tool to help you do that. I mean, a really powerful tool, and it is going to cause some dislocation in kinds of jobs. So at this point, I have an email newsletter. ChatGPT is pretty close to writing subject lines as good as mine.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It's a little nerve-wracking, actually, but I think it's good because all I want is good subject lines.
Yeah.
And so I think another thing that it puts a premium on, the generative AI, is it puts a premium on taste. You have to know what's good and what's not.
Point.
And artists know what's good and what's not. So if I see as a writer, a quasi-artist of sorts, if I say to ChatGPT, generate 20 subject lines for this newsletter. I have to be able to go through and say, okay, these 18 are terrible.
Yeah, that's true.
And between these two, this one's mediocre, but this one's pretty good. So taste matters a lot too. So those are all artistic sensibilities.
Yeah, I've noticed that like prompt writing, which I never thought would be a thing.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that some people that, because I'm a writer, I'm able to, I don't know how to say this, but when you actually need to write a prompt, when you actually need to tell AI to do something, sometimes it becomes quite difficult. It's like, how do I explain this sufficiently in a couple sentences? And so I've noticed that writers have an easier time communicating with artificial intelligence because they know how to get their thoughts in distilled, crunched ways. I don't know, not crunched.
Can I see you and raise you on that point?
Please.
I actually think that certain kinds of journalists have an advantage because one of the things because what journalists are typically good at, the good journalists are good at, are follow-up questions.
Yeah,
and typically with at least the way that generative AI and large language models work now, your first prompt is probably not going to get you what you want.
Right.
So you need to be able to follow up and say, can you do it this way? Can you try it this way? And so I think that kind of follow-up, which is a form of conversation. It's a conversation with a machine, but it's still a conversation.
Absolutely. So should we talk about regret, maybe?
Yeah. We'll talk about anything you want. It's your palace. It's your palace.
That's right. It's my palace.
Yeah.
The whole city of Vienna is going to come and attack me. So it's fair to say leaders have made quite a few mistakes in the last couple of years.
Yep.
We're not going to call out any names or point fingers, but it's fair to say they've made quite a few mistakes. So if a CEO or leader is watching this and they're kind of thinking to themselves, I don't have any regrets at all, should that be raising a red flag in their mind?
Yes, if you say, people who say they don't have regrets are often either misguided or they're not willing to confront their regrets. Let's talk about what regret is. Regret is an emotion.
Good starting point.
The regret is an emotion. It's that emotion we get, that painful feeling we get when we look backward and say, if only I had done this or hadn't done that. It makes us feel bad. What we know from 60 years of research is that regret is one of the most common emotions that human beings have. It is ubiquitous in the human experience. And if you're talking about people who don't have regrets, there are people who don't have regrets. Little kids don't have regrets because their brains haven't developed the ability to do counterfactual thinking that underlies regret. People with certain kinds of neurodegenerative disorders don't have regrets because they're literally the processes in their brains are interfered with. And sociopaths don't have regrets. But if you're not a kid, have brain damage or a sociopath, you probably have regrets.
Interesting.
And so I think it's an interesting question about this. I think it is interesting because regret stinks. I don't like experiencing regret. Do you like experiencing regret?
Not at all.
No, it feels terrible.
It does.
So why would something so aversive be so widespread?
Right.
And the answer is, it's useful if we treat it right. We just haven't learned to treat it right.
Right. So are people fearful of like penalties, like regret penalties in organizations? They don't want to open it up. They don't want to talk about it because they fear maybe blowback from a board or their leadership.
I think there's some of that. I think that's a really good point, actually, at certain kinds of levels. It's in the same way that what we know. There's some interesting research on apologies, for instance, and we know that
apologies.
Okay, yeah. Some interesting research in certain kinds of like medical malpractice, where the people who have suffered from the malpractice, essentially what they want more than anything is an apology. But the legal system says, no, you can't apologize because that's an admission. And so we have barriers like that.
It's a huge problem.
We have barriers like that there. But I think the bigger barrier is personal, is that what we'd rather do, what we've been taught to do in some ways because we're over-indexed on positivity, is just essentially when we hear that cry of regret is to put our fingers in our ears.
Yeah, right.
And say, I don't hear anything, I don't have any regrets. And that's a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to move on here. I have a little bit of a question on how do we deal with that.
Yeah.
But to let you all know, you're watching live, so what that means is in about 4 minutes or so, we're going to get to your questions. Now, as a warning, YouTube delays the posting of questions by about 40 seconds. So you got to get those questions in fast so that we can get to them. But if you don't, we'll just sit here and we can play cards.
You got cards?
No,
Okay.
but maybe someone can grab us cards.
We could arm wrestle. It's almost like an arm wrestling thing.
Can we do that?
That'd be a first.
Yeah, this table kind of is, we'll put a pad right there. So what do organizations do then if they have this regret suppression problem and they don't want to talk about, should leadership just say, hey, it's open to talk about regrets?
Yeah.
Is there even a line where you don't want to overshare?
Yes and no. I mean, what you don't want to do, what you want to do with regret, whether you're in an organization or an individual, you don't want to ignore it and you don't want to wallow in it. what you want to do is you want to confront it. You want to think about it. And this is the thing. This is the problem that we have dealing with, especially negative emotions. That we've been told that we should be positive all the time, never be negative. We're told that we should look forward and never look back. And that's bad advice.
That's interesting.
Bad advice.
Yeah.
What we need to do is look at our negative emotions as signals. Our negative emotions tell us anything. And there's one negative emotion. And think about it this way. Everybody has, like you, well, let's take you, Justin. Yesterday, let's say you made 100 decisions, or took 100 actions, 100 decisions and indecisions and actions and inactions. Most of them you don't remember today. But there are certain decisions and indecisions and actions from a year ago or 10 years ago or even 25 years ago that not only do you remember them, they make you feel bad. That's telling you something.
Yeah.
That's a very strong signal. And so when we listen to those signals and act on them in a systematic way, they help make us better. And we have 50 years of research in social psychology telling us that when people confront their regrets, don't ignore them and don't wallow in them, helps them become better negotiators, helps them become better problem solvers, helps them avoid cognitive biases, helps them become better strategists, helps them find more meaning.
Yeah.
And so it's an adaptive tool. That emotion is adaptive. It's there for a reason. We just haven't been taught to treat that emotion sensibly, strategically.
Do leaders build this sense of affinity, or do teams respect their leaders or love their leaders more, that are more vulnerable, they're more sharing of their regret?
This is a great point. This is a really, really great point, because like a lot of leaders have what amounts to essentially a forecasting error, where we forecast. We say, if I'm a leader, and I say to you, if I reveal a mistake, a vulnerability, a screw up, you're going to think less of me.
Right.
All right? That's a forecasting error, because not all the time, but much of the time, when we do that, people think more of us.
Yeah.
So we're making that kind of error. And so what you want to try to do as a leader is normalize this emotion of regret and normalize intelligent failures. And in some ways, even for intelligent failures, even celebrate intelligent failures.
So is acknowledging failure then, if I'm understanding you correctly, this is a key component of grasping the full value or the full power of regret?
Sure. Let's be granular here for a second. One thing a leader can do is this. Gather your team, tell them about a professional regret that you have, tell them what you learned about it, tell them what you're going to do about it. All right? Very systematic. That's what we want to do. And for processing our individual regrets, what we want to do is we want to treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt.
Yep.
A lot of times when we make mistakes, the way we talk to ourselves is cruel, it's brutal, it's lacerating, and it's also ineffective. Treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt. There's a strong argument to be made for disclosure. When we talk about our regrets, not only do we relieve the burden of them, but the act of converting this amorphous emotion into words is a sense-making, confers a sense-making advantage. And then, once we do that, we can draw a lesson from them. And so, when we treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt, disclose to make sense, and then take a step back and draw a lesson from them, it's a very useful emotion.
Yeah.
It's a very, very useful emotion.
Yeah, but no learning without that acknowledgement. The learning doesn't happen.
The learning doesn't happen unless you do all of those.
Yeah.
You have to sort of exonerate yourself. You have to make sense of it, and you have to draw a lesson from it.
Right.
It can't just, I have this big regret. I feel terrible. I'm so glad I got that off my chest. That's not enough.
Right.
Here's what I learned from it, and here's what I'm going to do about it.
Yeah, so that would be probably the line of oversharing too. If you're just sharing regrets for regret's sake and not sharing the lesson that comes along with it, you might be oversharing, because then people don't know what to do with it.
Or from a leader's perspective, sharing a regret that has nothing to do with the job.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
All right, you ready for some questions?
Lay it on me.
All right, so I think we have a few video questions. So we'll play those up, and we're going to mute our mics here so we don't feedback in the studio. But if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and see first question.
Let's see.
Hey JV, hey Dan Pink, Dr. Dre here. The question I have for you that I'm dying to know is, how do you deal with the comparison with other authors who write similar books to you? Me being someone who's writing a parenting book that's coming out in about a month, I really want to know how I can better deal with this comparison feeling to other people writing parenting books. Thanks.
It's a super interesting
It's a good question.
It's a super interesting question. Let me widen it beyond the narrow realm of authors. What we know from a ton of research is that social comparison is insidious. That when we compare ourselves to others, we are always going to fall short. So you might look at somebody and say, wow, their book has sold more copies than mine, but you're only seeing a small slice of their life.
Oh, that's true.
What you might not realize is that they're stuck in a terrible marriage. Their kids hate them. They're not in good physical health. They have no sense of meaning in their life. So, in general, social comparison is not in all cases is not very good for us, because
Right.
what we're doing is that we are comparing the totality of ourselves with a tiny portion of someone else's self.
Right, and then
it's
we're duplicating that tiny portion that is probably highlighted.
We're taking that tiny portion, and we're comparing our full selves, which we know fully,
Right.
and we know all the flaws, with somebody's very narrow self, and that's dangerous. What you're better off doing is there's certain kinds of things where comparison can help performance. Certain kinds of athletic things. There's a famous study
that's a good point.
where you put somebody, you say race around the track as fast as you can, and then they do it again, and you have somebody else who's running fast. You'll run faster. So some of that, there's elements of comparison when it becomes benchmarking and so forth can be useful. I think the rule of thumb here essentially is compare yourself today to the self you used to be, and try to be better than you were before, and try to get better on your own terms, on your own values, and to the extent it's possible. It's not always possible, but don't worry about what other folks are doing,
So that's
because you're going to lose. I don't mean you. I mean you, but but everybody, all of us,
Yeah.
all of us will lose if we.
It's a build-up thing. So if you're comparing yourself in a build-up manner to build yourself up, great. If you're comparing yourself and it's tearing yourself down, bad.
If you're
Is that
comparing if you're
oversimplified?
comparing yourself in a way that enhances your performance for your own sake,
Yeah.
that's valuable.
That's
But
great.
if you're comparing yourself in this kind of doom loop of they're better than me, they're better than me, they're better than me, what's wrong with me? That's insidious.
Right. Let's see if we have another question. I know we have another video question. Let's go ahead and
Coming in from all over the world
Coming
here.
in from all over the world.
Hey Dan, this is Brian in Kentucky. I read The Power of Regret earlier this year, and it was super helpful for me in a lot of ways. One of which is that it confirmed that a lot of the decisions that I've made to this point in life have been investments in those really powerful things that people regret if they don't take care of them later. Things like family, community, faith, things like that. I'm at the point in life, though, where I'm seeing other people around me who maybe haven't made those decisions achieve more success in career, business, ventures, things like that. And sometimes, honestly, I still struggle with the fact that the investments I've made in the really important things have maybe held me back from some of those other status markers that other people seem to enjoy. So I wonder if you have any tips for how to reconcile those feelings and how to find some contentment around the satisfaction of knowing that I have invested in the most important things, even if that means my life might not appear as successful or impressive in the short term. Thanks for all you do.
Okay, Brian.
That's good.
Brian
That's
from
good.
Brian from Kentucky. It's a version of a social comparison question. I would say a few things. Number one is that I'm not sure that your analysis is necessarily right. That there is some kind of inherent trade-off between doing the things that are kind of psychologically, socially important, doing things that accrue some kind of professional success. So it could be that actually the fact that this is bugging you a little bit means you want to actually do something different professionally or do something in a different way professionally. So I wouldn't dismiss that impulse right there. The other thing that I would do, though, is ask yourself what they might think of you. My guess is that if they know the totality of your life, they're saying, oh man, this guy did it right.
Yeah, it's almost inaction versus action. Regret a
yeah.
little bit.
But it's also this idea. Here's the thing.
No, I'll expand on that. Like basically, if Brian had not taken action, there's a chance that he actually may regret that to a higher degree.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we do regret inactions more than actions. But here's the thing: what was bugging him, I think, part of it was what other people thought of him.
Oh,
all right. I think that was part of it.
I missed that.
I think that was part of what he was saying. So when people look at me, they don't see as much professional success. And here's what I would say. This is really important. It was liberating to me when I figured this out, which is that I was concerned at one point in my life about what people thought about me, and then I discovered what people thought about me, And you know what they thought about me? They didn't.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking about me.
Yeah.
They were thinking about themselves.
That's very true.
So do your, so do your thing. And so the ability to, not in a sociopathic way, not to care what other people think is a superpower.
Excellent.
And I would say, I mean, to Brian, it's like, it sounds like you won.
Yeah, that's a good point. Got another one here coming on through YouTube. I believe this is probably YouTube. A question for Dan. What will it take to shift the scorecard and accountability for leaders regarding right brain aspects of being a leader? Performance review, bonuses, awards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we need to, I mean, I'm not against measurement, in general. It depends on, and I'm not, I mean, they mentioned, bonuses and things like that. I'm not against variable comp on its own. I mean, I think what we want to do is we want to have measures that matter, that are simple, hard to game, and that connect meaningfully to what the organization is trying to do. One of the things that bugs me is that I think the problem is that we have some of these performance management systems where there are 38 different criteria on which people are measured.
Yeah, it's so
or we
true.
have bonus systems. We have bonus systems
that is so true.
we have bonus systems that take 15 pages to describe, and a law degree to be able to interpret what it means,
right.
and endless gaming, and then a whole administrative apparatus. So I think there's something to be said for simple measures that matter and that are hard to game.
Yeah.
And so that's true for, and also the other thing is that when we look at the research on motivation, one of the things that is destructive about certain kinds of rewards is the contingency part of it. Is if you do this, then you get that.
Yeah.
Because that contingency is a form of control. And what we know from human civilization is that when people are controlled, they have two reactions. They comply or they defy.
Right.
And that's it. And if you're running an organization, I don't think you want compliant people all the time at all. And you certainly don't want defiant people.
Yeah.
But mechanisms that control only give you those two responses.
And I would say even comply sometimes isn't ideal either.
No, not at all.
I remember when I was at a company and they had this required dress code.
Yeah.
And I would I'm like, I don't need a dress code. I can dress nicely. I know what to dress like for customers. I'm not an idiot. But I noticed that people complying with the dress code were technically wearing the correct dress code, but they looked completely sloppy. They didn't iron their shirts. And I'm like, this did not accomplish anything.
Right, exactly. So if you just let people, this is a bigger problem I think in HR, which is that many of our HR rules, many of our systems and processes are designed to shackle the people, shackle the bad actors.
Yeah.
And my view of organizations is that like 95% of us are totally fine. They can follow that kind of rule.
Yeah.
And so what we have is rules and processes designed to restrain the bad 5% that actually end up inhibiting the good 95%.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did a panel at the Global Peter Drucker Forum earlier. My wife, who you actually wrote about in one of her books
in a book called When.
Yeah, it was kind of funny.
Pancake Breakfast.
Pancake Breakfast. It's now world famous Pancake Breakfast because it was in your book, which is kind of interesting. But I did see the tail end of that. I was in there. I didn't see the talk, but I saw people mobbing you with questions. I like to make that sound extreme. I think I saw 4 people, but we'll just say it was a mob. And what are some of the...
Under the right circumstances,
4
people is a mob.
Was there more before I got in there? Was there
Yeah, it was like...
Crowd surfing?
Yeah, it was really it was overwhelming. That you saw the cluster post security.
Yes, that's right. So what's the feedback? Are there any patterns? Are there any questions you get a lot of at
what I talk about with regret is that what you often find is that it's another forecasting error. We think that people don't want to talk about their regrets and don't want to hear about our regrets.
Oh.
And it's completely wrong.
Sure.
So what you heard was people wanted to talk about their regrets and what to do about them.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was a huge part of it.
Huh. Do you kind of become an executive therapist at some of these events sometimes?
I become, in some level, an unlicensed therapist. But here's the thing. People are their own therapists.
Yeah.
And one of the best therapeutic questions, one of the best decision-making questions, and I used it even perhaps with the people you saw.
Yeah.
Is people come to me and say, "Oh, I have a regret about such and such. I'm stuck in a decision. I don't know what to do," and I say, "What would you tell your best friend to do?"
Yeah. Right.
And they always know.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So that's what's called self-distancing, where we tend to be, as human beings, pretty good problem solvers, but pretty bad at solving our own problems because we're too close to it. So any kind of mechanism that you can do to take a step back allows you to solve your own problems more effectively. The great leadership example of this is Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, who said when he was faced with a tough decision, he would always ask himself this question: if I were replaced tomorrow, what would my successor do? And he always knew. And it typically was, I'm going to act more boldly, I'm going to do the right thing.
So obviously Global Peter Drucker Forum is a business event.
Yes.
But most of the regrets being shared with you, are they business regrets?
They're
or are they
mixed.
personal ones?
They're
They're
mixed.
a mix.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it's an interesting question too, because for some people, that border is very murky. The border is what is a professional regret and what is a personal regret is not clearly demarcated.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about writing regrets down.
Okay, so
because I think this is one of your little hacks in the power of regret
that
helps people to deal with them better, right?
It absolutely is, and let's talk about why that is. I think it's a really interesting mechanism. That emotions in general are abstract. They're amorphous. When we take that amorphous emotion and we describe it, this is why therapists often tell people to name their emotions, to name the feeling, okay? We take that abstraction, we name it, we make it concrete. When we do that, a few things happen. Number one, it's less menacing. It's gone from this amorphous blob hanging over us to something that we can make sense of. And that's so that it helps in that, it defangs it, and it helps in the sense-making process. What's interesting is there's some research showing that for certain kinds of positive emotions, that's a bad idea. That actually identifying and naming and writing down all your positive emotions might not be such a great idea, because you revel in the amorphousness of it. So what it does is that so a very interesting thing that you can do is, if you have a regret, is write about your regret 15 minutes a day for 3 days.
Really?
Yes, and that can defang it, help you make sense of it, and set you up for that important stage where you draw a lesson from it.
Interesting. It's kind of bringing it out of the mystery and the mist. You can fully.
It's more mist than mystery. I mean it. It's misty. It's amorphous, and that can feel kind of. This is why we have in scary movies that demonic things, that horrifying things are often blobby. They don't have a form. They're amorphous. They're misty, and so because that's a menace to us, because we can't make sense of it. When we name it, when we describe it, when we memorialize it in writing or even speaking, it goes from amorphous to something concrete,
something real,
and we can make sense.
It has
of it.
barriers that I can attack.
Right, exactly.
It's kind of the end of Scooby-Doo when they pull the mask off, and you're like, oh, it's just a dude. It's just this guy in a mask. That's all it was. You know what? I wanted to make sure to get this up here. There we go. Perfect. I had it with me, just had it over there on the table. The book is The Power of Regret by Dan Pink. You can pick that up. Dan, thank you so much. #1 New York Times bestselling author.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks so much for coming in here. Really appreciate it. People want to reach out to you. How do they do that?
I've got a website, danpink.com. And I got an email newsletter. Those are usually the best ways. I'm not a huge social media person, so if you trash me on social media, I won't see it.
And thank you to everybody who submitted questions. I'm Justin Brady, and you're watching Drucker Forum TV.